what's up, witches? I'm bringing you something completely different today. I originally just wanted to sit down and do this completely random video, but I figured rather than go through all the trouble of sitting down and putting on makeup and then having to sit down and film, instead I'm going to chit-chat with you about one of my favorite new TV shows that's on right now while I do my makeup. Get cozy and get ready with me while I talk about the Gilded Age. So, the Gilded Age. This is a TV show that I just found out about recently, even though it just finished its second season on HBO. As soon as I found out that it existed, I had to go jump in and start binge watching it because it is by Julian Fellowes, who is the same guy who brought us our beloved Downton Abbey. And if there is one thing that I am a sucker for, it is a costume drama or a period piece. When I found out that this was a TV show that I had not seen before and was by the same guy that did Downton Abbey, I'm like, I don't even really care what it's about. I'm in. Sign me up. I thought that this would be a fun show to talk about because A, I'm really into it, and I haven't really seen a whole lot of discourse on it on YouTube so far. At least not just popping up in my random feed. So I want to sit down and talk about it, especially because a lot of the characters in the TV show are reminding me of book characters or literary characters, particularly in the novels of Edith Wharton. And if there is one thing that I am fond of saying of myself and on this channel, it is that you can take the girl out of the English major, but you can't take the English major out of the girl. So I wanted to incorporate a little bit of like literary comparative analysis while also just gabbing about this fun little costume drama with you guys and what I enjoy about it while I put some makeup on. So yeah, this will really be a test for me because I'm really bad at multitasking and have ADD, so I'm going to try to not only do a get ready with me and focus on putting makeup on, but also like read kind of my little notes and talk about a specific topic instead of just rambling and chit-chatting. So we'll see how this goes. But I'm not gonna do anything too fancy. I usually never wear foundation, so this is just gonna be some quick little concealer, eye makeup, blush. And I did curl my little bangs for this. I've been having fun curling my bangs lately with this little tiny curling iron that I got a couple years ago and haven't really used too often because that's about all it's good for unless I want to sit there for 2 hours and curl one tiny strand at a time. But it's good for this right now because I kind of trimmed my bangs into this awkward stage where they're a little too long, but I don't want to make them any shorter because I was going for more of like a curtain bang. And then my other challenge in this video is going to be I also had to put on the press-on acrylic nails, which I'm also not used to working with and doing makeup with. So we'll really see how this video goes. But yeah, I want to talk about the Gilded Age. I binge watched all of season 1, and then thankfully season 2 was just airing and just finished airing recently. So it was the perfect time for me to get into it because I just picked up this little cheapy eyeliner I was gonna try from Wet n Wild. First thing I'm gonna put on that I want to try that I just picked up at the drugstore because they finally had it is this NYX lip oil. I don't really care about any supposed plumping effects. I just love a good nourishing lip oil, so we're gonna try this out. Very glossy. I'm gonna leave that on for a minute while I do the rest of the makeup. I'll go in with my little Cleo palette here. But yeah, my bangs are kind of giving like Gilded Age. Gilded Age, Aunt Ada realness. Because let's face it, I want to be the Marion and be the ingenue, but I'm 36, so I would be considered a spinster if I wasn't married at this age back then, which is sad. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about, which is kind of, yeah, a good segue into the topic of the video, which is the TV show The Gilded Age. So it follows these high society, Upper East Side New York elites back when New York was still in its heyday, in its infancy, still growing and changing as a city, especially with the dawn of the Industrial Age, which is part of what gave rise to this Gilded Age, which was called that because there's this battle which you see play out for all the drama in the show of old money versus new money. Old New York, based on like the old original Dutch settlers, which is where we have our main family of the old money, the Van Rhines, coming into play, and then their niece, one of the main characters, Marion Brook, coming to live with them, and their, or rather, especially Aunt Agnes's very staunch anti-new money stance against their neighbors across the way, the Russells, who I believe are supposed to be parallels of like the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies and all those new money rich people and like robber barons that got all this money off of industry, all these new industries that were popping up, and especially like the steel industry, the railroad industry. Think about playing a game of Monopoly. That's basically the show and George Russell. He's trying to win at Monopoly and buy up all the railroads over here, literally. There are a lot of parallels that I noticed in particular with the main character of Marion Brook, and this main character in Edith Wharton's novel, The House of Mirth, Lily Bart. And let's just say that I am really hoping that Miss Marion's trajectory does not mirror Miss Lily Bart's trajectory in this novel. I remember I had to read it in college for one of my English major literature courses, and at the time I didn't honestly really appreciate it for what it was. It was very, very one note, very just following the life and like day in the life of this fallen society woman, Lily, who's like down on her luck, fallen on hard times, and was once part of this upper crust elite and in the social circles of the old money, but has since kind of like fallen down the ladder a few rungs in the social structure, but is just desperate to cling to that and like claw her way back up by any means necessary. And unfortunately, as a single unmarried woman in this very structured society, which had very limited roles for women to play, she finds herself like just kind of bound by circumstance and by, unfortunately, the malicious actions and social schemings of others. And there's definitely a lot of that in the Gilded Age show because it's a costume drama. Julian Fellows of Downton Abbey fame over here, like I said. It's just a lot of rich white peoples and their dramas. But what's really cool about the Gilded Age is, since it's set in America, there's a little bit more room to play with the stories and the social structures that it explores. So we also see Marion's life and high society, white rich culture, and white aristocracy contrasted with the character of Peggy Scott. And she is a member of this African-American aristocracy, which was able to spring up and flourish in the aftermath of the Civil War. And so we see it follow her as the child of parents who were born in the South, and in some cases born in slavery, but who have now made a life for themselves and made a career and a name for themselves in New York. It's interesting, especially when I watch some of behind the scenes about the characters and the costuming, that with costuming in particular, they wanted to depict Marion and Peggy as on the same social level with the outfits and the level of outfit that they are able to wear, and see this contrast between these two levels of the elite in society that we don't often get to see portrayed in media, especially American media, where it's not just the Civil War and slavery, but really seeing the lives and the rich, detailed and varied and multifaceted lives that these people of all like classes and races and social structures were able to lead in society. And it's just this portrayal of African American society that especially I have not really come across or been exposed to a lot. So I think that's another bonus in this show's playbook. It's just depicting not only the rich white aristocracy and their dramas and their stories, but we also get to see Peggy and her family and what their lives in Brooklyn are like at this time. To switch back to Marion for a moment, some of the things in particular that really reminded me of the Edith Wharton book, House of Mirth, and the character of Lily Bart are that both of these characters are young orphans, so they don't have any parental guidance of their own at this point, and Marion especially is someone who was not raised in New York. She's coming here from like Pennsylvania, I think. And so she is very much not only the ingenue, but naive in a lot of ways to the social structures of New York society. So it leads to a lot of like her bucking against tradition and these like roles that her aunt and that old high society, old New York expects her to fulfill, of just wanting to find a rich husband and get married and settle down basically. And one of the big points of contention between not only her and her aunt, but her and trying to find a future husband is that she doesn't just want to be this high society woman who sits around all day and looks pretty and wears fancy outfits, as fun as that sounds. She wants to not only, participate in charity organizations, which is what was considered suitable endeavors for a woman of that social class, but she wants to hold a job. And she ends up teaching in the show and teaching art for a girls' school. So it's just with the time period that the novel is set in, with being after the Civil War and just with the costumes and the soundtrack. This also gives me very much 1994 Little Women vibes, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And that's also what kept me interested and got me really drawn in quickly to this show. And then along with that, the Downton Abbey aspect, we see a little bit of the upstairs downstairs with the households of the Van Ryns and the Russells and them with their upstairs dramas. And then we also see the downstairs households depicted and the help. And it's interesting here in America that we get to see again this very diverse mix and melting pot, if you will, of people of all different backgrounds, all mixing in this household. Like, especially in the Van Ryn servants' quarters, we see a woman of German descent, a young maid of Irish descent, and a young boy who's New York born and raised, and kind of like from Brooklyn. And then we see like the butler, who is English and of the kind of like in the know of like the old aristocracy. So it's really cool to like just see all that play out and see that side of things that we don't really talk about a lot in American history, and just like, this time of American immigration especially, and how a lot of these people were viewed, and how even if like today you would have been regarded as white, depending on even like what country you came from and like what brand or flavor of Christianity you practiced, you would have faced discrimination as an immigrant coming to America, especially the Irish Catholics. And I think the Italians as well. So I think it'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see if that plays out in the show at all, especially with the introduction and interplay between them and African American characters, to see, it was interesting to see in one of the first episodes, the Irish maid is worried that like the freed slaves are gonna come north and take their jobs. So it's interesting to see the more things change in American society, the more they stay the same, especially when it comes to things like workers' rights and the struggle with labor and the labor unions between the Russells and the Vanderbilts of the world. But I'm getting off topic again, because especially what I just wanted to talk about is similarities in particular that I noticed between Marion and Lily Bart in the Edith Wharton novels, which watching the Gilded Age just also gave me a newfound appreciation for Edith Wharton as like an early American female author, which was very rare in those days. And just, at the time when I read House of Mirth, I didn't appreciate it for what it was, but it is this very interesting glimpse into high society from the point of view of a woman. And so I think especially Marion is based on a lot of these Edith Wharton type characters. And why do I say that? Well, like I said, they're both orphans. So Lily was kind of on the outskirts of New York society, but still like grew up there for the most part. But Marion is completely new to it and a little bit naive in that sense, especially when it comes to the, like, I'm just gonna call it like office politics back then of rich middle-aged white women, because let me tell you, as someone that works in an office nowadays, it is still a thing. So if you can just imagine that, but times 100, like just the social maneuverings and manipulations of these rich white women who had nothing better to do than sit around and scheme with one another. So it'll be curious to see how Marion is able to navigate that, because Lily Bart in the novel definitely has her troubles with this. Both of them are out on the marriage market, but have no real wealth of their own, and yet they are still thrust into this upper crust and upper echelon of old New York society and expected to act accordingly. Ironically enough, both Lily in the novel and Marion in season 1 of the show end up falling in love with a lawyer who professed their undying love but ditch her in the end, which I thought was very interesting parallel there. And not only is it ironic that in the show her lawyer is a man named Rakes, because he is literally a rake in like the definition of the word. And both of them are the ward of a rather more straight-laced aunt who, yeah, kind of has some pull and is able to have some sway over her doings and her social comings and goings, because she's dependent on them for the money and that she needs to maneuver and maintain her position, this very precarious position in society where the least infraction or social faux pas will get you shunned for life. And we see Marion in particular really rejecting these notions and fighting against them and really wanting to come into her own before she settles down. There's still that like hopeless romantic side of her that's able to get swept away by the Larry Rakes of the world and wants to find love and enjoys like the whirlwind romance of just the city itself. But then there's also this side of her that wants to be independent and wants to do something and like make a name for herself in the world. Like she sees people like even Peggy able to go off and become a published author and get a job writing for a newspaper, and she envies her that in a lot of ways, you know, in a lot of ways, even though she is a Black woman living in American society still and dealing with the limitations thereof, she has a little bit of degree of social freedom of movement that Marion lacks. Like her aunt doesn't want her to have a job. She thinks that it reflects poorly on the family, as if, you know, it would say to society as a whole that the family cannot support Marion and might be poor just to go work and labor like some common menial. Ugh, the horror. And so yeah, it's just interesting to see Marion trying to navigate those limitations that are being placed upon her while still maintaining a reputation. And that is a lot of the struggle that Lily faces in House of Mirth as well, especially since she is someone that did once have this place in the upper echelons of society and those elite social circles, but has fallen on hard times. And in the novel, it is of her own doing. I think she ends up acquiring a massive amount of gambling debt at cards, but it's just because like that's what people did. You went out to parties and you dined and you played cards and you bet money, and that's just what you did. So if you didn't have money to play at cards, you didn't go out and you didn't socialize. So yeah, she ended up just falling into a lot of these traps and pitfalls, in some cases of her own making, and then in a lot of other cases just because, unlike Marion, she really wants to maintain this position in society. And it's also an interesting parallel that there's these characters in the novels who end up really doing Lily wrong turns and treating her very poorly and using her for their own social gain. And their names are Bertha and George Dorset, which are the same first names as the main power couple in the show, Bertha and George Russell. So I'm wondering if that was deliberate or just a happy coincidence on the show writers' parts. Bertha and George are definitely social climbers and schemers, especially Bertha, and it seems like the novel Bertha is the same. And it also makes me wonder if the Bertha in the show, who is here the mother of Larian, I said Larian, which is the couple shipping name, Bertha is Larry's mom in the show, and Larian, aka Larry and Mary, is the primary OTP ship for the show, and we finally saw it come to a little bit of fruition at the end of season 2 and get a little bit of payoff for the build up there. I'm a little bit conflicted if Mrs. Russell will find Marion a worthy bride for her precious baby Larry, because she is a social climber, and like I said, Marion has no real money of her own, but her aunts do, and her aunts also come with the Van Ryn name and old money social status in New York that Bertha Russell is vying tooth and claw for. So that right there might give Marion an in with Bertha, but I wonder if she'll still think Marion is good enough. I also wonder if others, especially her aunts, are going to find out about, well, her aunt Agnes in particular is going to find out about her near elopement with Mr. Rakes in season 1, because she did nearly run off to elope with him and like nearly escaped disaster, because like I said, he ditched her, literally a rape. But right now in the show, I believe there are only a handful of people that know about that, and her aunt is not one of them, and Bertha Russell is not one of them. But I wonder if somehow it will get out that she nearly eloped with Rakes, because he's still like in there lurking in society somewhere. He married another like society woman. So yeah, I do wonder about that. In case you're wondering, after my Clio palette, I'm going in with this ColourPop in a trance palette with all of these blues and purples that I love. It's so dreamy. So we're just blending that on in, and then pressing this color all over on the lid. So yeah, I'm wondering what is in store for Miss Marion, because much like Lily, she is a older but still youth, like not too old, not treading too close to the dreaded spinster territory, but yeah, she's older but still in the marriage market, has no money of her own, but is still expected to climb this social ladder. And Marion is more willing, unlike her aunt, to socialize with the new money people in society and other undesirables, and risk her high society reputation and her aunt's wrath. And so she's really like torn between these two worlds, along with being hemmed in by others' expectations and opinions of her. And others' expectations and opinions is what largely ends up leading to Lily Bart's downfall in House of Mirth, because she herself doesn't really do a lot of the things that she ends up being accused of or has a bad reputation for, but she ends up being caught in these extenuating circumstances, wrong place, wrong time, or other people end up spreading rumors about her, and it's just that easy to get a bad reputation and be shunned by society. So Marion is playing a dangerous game, and like her aunt is even cautioning her after she rejects her, spoilers, second proposal in season 2 of someone that her aunt does approve of. I miss Maid Marion. I was a little worried, not gonna lie, because I know it is like a really popular show on HBO right now, just because it's not really up against anything else right now. And you know, I know I'm not the only one that's a sucker for a costume drama, but it's Julian Fellows, so that's kind of one of the things that I appreciate about his shows and things like Downton Abbey, is it is like pretty white people with problems. And it's very like low stakes drama, which is what I need in my life. So yeah, I'm in it. I'm here for the low stakes drama. Don't get me wrong, Downton Abbey had its moments. It had its tragedies. I'm still not over Matthew, but like there was never anything crazy. You know, never anything too scary or anxiety inducing. It's just like what dramas, what social schemings, what miscommunications are we going to have, and like secrets and stuff like that, you know, that kind of thing. I'm here for that. The Gilded Age, it does like get a little bit more like high stakes drama because we do have, you know, Mr. Russell, George Russell out here being the robber baron OG and just sometimes being utterly ruthless in his actions to get ahead, and they don't drag it out because, I mean, for better or worse, this show has fallen into the streaming trope of like 8 to 10 episode seasons, and so there's a lot of like dramas and things that end up being resolved like within either the same episode or like the next episode, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, I'm here for the low stakes drama, so I do enjoy that part of it, and I can't wait to see what happens to the Russells and the Van Ryns, especially Miss Marion. Like, her aunt has even warned her now. She's rejected another proposal. She knew at least about the flirtationship with the lawyer, whom she of course did not approve of. So I'm hoping that Marion will not take the path of Lily Bart and continue to get more and more like strikes against her social report card. But as far as like people like her aunt are concerned, she's been towing the line since she got there. I'm also wondering if Marion will perhaps follow in Peggy's footsteps as a writer and become the Edith Wharton of the show herself, and like maybe write a novel about some of her experiences. The other big Edith Wharton novel is Age of Innocence, and in that one there's a love triangle, so I'm wondering if we might have a love triangle at some point between some characters. I also do like, since I said that the show itself gives me a lot of like Little Women vibes, and Louisa May Alcott wrote a lot of stories like and short stories from the perspective of different characters living in that time, and gives some insight into what it felt like to be people living in that time, and touch on different social topics like how I mentioned, you know, discrimination against Irish immigrants. And there are two other novelists that do get name dropped at different points in the show, which is Henry James, who I believe I also had to read as part of my English major, and Louisa May Alcott. And now to just kind of get into some of the fun things that I love about the show while I continue to do my makeup. I do love the Russells as much as they are kind of like love to hate characters and like the schemers and the social climbers. They are also kind of like couples goals, and you're kind of willing to forgive them their actions because their bond for together and like their love for each other is so strong, and like they support each other so wholeheartedly in their machinations and their schemes. Like, I kind of love to see it. George Russell loves making money like he loves his wife. And like I said, they're kind of based loosely on the Vanderbilt family, and especially Mrs. Vanderbilt's attempts at social climbing. But I was looking into some of the historical background behind people like the Vanderbilts. So when it comes to the Russells, I do love to watch them. They are kind of couples goals for me. But we see their relationship get a little bit rocky at certain points, especially when Bertha feels like George is not supporting her. And at one point, there's this drama because, you know, since it's a Julian Fellowes costume drama, we have to have a snarky, scheming, behind-the-scenes lady's maid, here is Mrs. Russell's lady's maid, Turner, and she tries to put the moves on Mr. Russell at one point, but gets shot down and rejected, but he doesn't fire her. He's just like, no way in hell, I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole, get away from me. I love making money like I love my wife. But now that their relationship in season 2 especially is gonna get a little bit rocky, and I predict they're gonna have some conflicts in season 3, I'm wondering if George is gonna second guess his decision not to take the new Mrs. Winterton, née Turner, up on her offer because she was like, I don't care about money and everything or parties. I just want to be someone that loves you and is here like for you, to support you and make sure that you feel taken care of and loved. You know, he still turns her down and is like, I'm fine. I'm happy where I'm at. I'm happy in my marriage. But even he, at one point in season 1, says something to his wife that, like, he knows that he's never gonna be first place to her, and that, like, her social climbing and things is always gonna take priority in her life and in her mind. So I'm wondering if he's gonna start having some regrets, especially when he finds out that Bertha may have sold their daughter out to a British duke. Is that gonna drive a wedge between them? I guess we'll find out. So it also makes me wonder, even though he turned her down, Bertha knows about the encounter. I'm wondering if Winterton, née Turner, even though she didn't have an affair with George, and even if she doesn't have an affair with George, if she will still cause it to be rumored in society just to hurt Bertha. I'm also wondering in season 3 if there's going to be society gossip around Larry and Marion, or Larian, because, I mean, for better or worse, Marion sure does seem to be really running through New York City's most eligible bachelors. Now, like I said, when I looked up the historical background behind the Vanderbilts, I found that the original W. Vanderbilt, who built the giant Vanderbilt mansion that I think the Russell mansion is based on, ended up dying only a couple years after they finished building it and moved in. So I'm really hoping that that does not happen to the Russells in the show, because I do love George, and the actor who plays him is doing a phenomenal job at portraying him. Like, he just has some scene-stealing moments where I am like, hand this man his Emmy, because he's just killing it, especially when he gives his like big power speeches in the boardroom and things like that, and just like shuts it down, mic drop, end of discussion, walks away. I live for it. It's some of my favorite moments in the show. I'm hoping they don't borrow from that aspect of that Vanderbilt's life story. But I do know that his son, who George is based off of, and his wife, Alva, who Bertha is based off of, end up getting divorced after an alleged affair with her best friend. So I'm really wondering if that storyline is going to come in, especially with what I was saying about the rumored affairs, or if he is going to end up having an affair, or if Winterton might just cause it to be rumored that he's cheating to break up their marriage out of spite. But also, before that happens, he does end up building the world's largest yacht, and they basically like spend a couple of years pleasure cruising in Europe. So that would be a fun place for the show to go if they choose to take it out of New York. And it does end up being an aspect of the House of Mirth novels, where if you're spending too much time on rich billionaires' yachts as a young unmarried woman, it might cause some certain unsavory rumors to be said about you. So that would be interesting if we see that come into play. In one of the YouTube videos that I watched about the Vanderbilts, I learned that it was also rumored that Vanderbilt himself hired someone to stage getting caught in the act of cheating in order to end his own marriage. Like, he staged being caught cheating to get out of his marriage. So I'm wondering if that's also something that they could borrow from. Either way, I feel like we're gonna see the relationship between George and Bertha Russell sadly be a little bit more rocky in season 3, one way or another. To talk about and just wrap this up with other things that I love about this show, the costumes. The costumes especially remind me a lot of like Downton Abbey meets Bridgerton, and especially if you watch some of the behind the scenes of like making the costumes and designing costumes for this show, it makes sense. Because especially the contrast of costumes between old money versus new money, and we saw that depicted in Bridgerton between the Bridgertons and the Featheringtons, especially with what they wear and the colors they wear and the jewelry and the styling and accessories, where the Bridgertons are the old money in society, and so they're very like more staid, traditional, pastel colors, especially blues, a lot of florals and like very simple designs. And then whereas the Featheringtons definitely live up to their name, they wear a lot of bright colors, jewel tones, excessive sparkly jewelry, lots of florals, lots of feathers, feather hair pieces, rich swept updos, and a more just like modern take on some of these historical costumes. And we definitely see that too, and I wanted to point out in Gilded Age, between the Van Ryns and the Russells, and even just like the Russells and old money New York in general, because like old money we see, especially with the Van Ryns, a lot of dark colors, dark rich fabrics and dark jewel tones, rich brocades, maybe some floral patterns and like lots of florals on the hats, high collars, big bustles, lace frills, versus when we get to the new money and Bertha Russell, it's British aristocracy versus riffing on French aristocracy and Versailles, and this like overconsumption to the point where it's almost gaudy, tacky, ostentatious. The word that springs to mind that I feel like especially the Van Ryns would have used is gauche. Bright colors, silks and satins, bold patterns, rich fabrics, and lots of it. Drapes like Roman togas and ruffles galore. Big hats, and especially Bertha Russell seems to favor feathers over florals. And a lot of her costume designs almost have this Art Nouveau hint to them, with these like sweeping columns as opposed to like big wide still like bustles and like big wide silhouettes. She's like more slim and columned silhouettes. And so I really love that they took that into account and gave themselves a little bit more freedom in this case to play with some of the costumes, just to depict and strengthen that visual contrast for us. And then like I said, I also just love getting to see these costumes shown in African American society and see that they were on just the same level as like Marion with what Peggy wears, but just to see like her own personal style come into it and what colors and patterns she favors, with like the rich deep purples and chocolate browns and like plaids and lace and things like that. I'm just drinking it up. I love it. With Marion, we especially see, and even within the Van Ryn household, we see a little bit of contrast between Agnes and Ada, or the head of the household versus the old maid who's relying on the kindness of her sister for everything she has. She definitely tends to wear a lot more simple dresses, and they both do, but especially Ada, since she has no money of her own, it's reflected in what she wears. And this takes me back to Anne of Green Gables, where all Anne wanted was a dress with puffed sleeves, but to the Marillas and the practical people of the world who have to think of, well, what does that mean for what I'm spending and having to make in terms of fabric here? All those puffs and frills and lace and ruffles is extra fabric. So if you're someone who's living within your means or just living a more simple life, you don't have money to waste on extra fabric for puffs and frills. So we see that even reflected in the contrast between Agnes and Ada, where Agnes wears richer fabrics, puffs, and lace, where Ada wears like very simple sleeves, very like simple staid collars, not a lot of ruffs and frills, and it really like serves to emphasize this contrast of like the more fabric and embellishment that you're wearing, the richer you are and the more expensive it is. And so we even see, especially in like the season finale with the opera dress that Gladys Russell wears, poofs, ruffles, frilled to high heaven. Marion is kind of this interesting balance between the two, this mix of old and new styles, where she doesn't wear all the ruffles and frills because much like her aunt, she also has no money of her own. She does wear a little bit of a mix of old and new styles, and especially with the color themes that they go with Marion and the styling, it's just projecting this theme of innocence, especially when we see her in her theme of yellow and white. She wears a lot of pale yellows and golds, And to me, that just definitely emphasizes her naivety and her ingenue status. Particularly, I wanted to point out what she wears in season 1, episode 9, when she goes to the ball right after having her heart broken and being stood up by Mr. Rakes. She's still wearing her signature color. I'm calling it the Bleeding Heart ball gown because it's accented by this dark red ruffle right over where her heart would be. That just to me symbolizes her bleeding heart as she's standing there trying to look pretty on the dance floor still. And especially the contrast of outfits and styling with Gladys Russell before and after her debut, when she's like still wearing her hair down like a youthful girl, like a schoolgirl would, like a girl who's not out in society or considered a woman yet would, but up until then you would wear your hair down. I believe, you know, she's still styled more like an adult, but still with that like schoolgirl air to her. And then once you're out or considered an eligible woman for marriage, we see her wearing her hair up and styled more maturely. And then with Peggy, like I said, you know, I did think it was really cool that we get to see her in some high society ball gown look, the different hats they wear and the different fabrics and fabric choices, and just those subtle things like that and what it means for their social status. Because even with like Peggy, I do like that they said in terms of like the styles that she wears and the caliber of outfits that she wears, it's putting her on at least an equal footing with someone like Marion. But I did notice that in terms of like the fabric choices and cuts that she chooses, it is a little bit more practical in terms of everyday wear because Peggy is an everyday working woman. So she's a little bit more practical in her fabric choices, wearing a little bit of these more darker, richer colors that will like hide dirt and stains well, and these more practical, less expensive plaids and calicos. And she just seems to favor more simple lace details, but still with, you know, brooches and fancy jewelry and chokers and hats and things like that. But that's really all I have to say. I rambled for way longer than I intended to on this one, but I think I held it together pretty well while I got my makeup done. We got the look together in the end, and the nails actually didn't give me too much trouble, so that's good. I hope that you enjoyed this fun little completely off-topic chit-chat with me. Like I said, I was just really loving binging through this show. I'm excited that we're getting more seasons of it. I can't wait to see what happens with the Van Ryns and the Russells and what happens with Peggy. I hope she finds her place in the world and her happiness, and the same for Marion. I'm rooting for Larian. I definitely ship Larian, but I'll be curious to see if Marion is able to find her place in the world without tarnishing her precious high society reputation. So thanks for sitting down and getting ready with me and chatting about something which I just find fun to chat about. And if you are also watching this show and noticing some fun historical or literary parallels, let me know. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay classy.